U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi lands in Taiwan and China holds military drills in response. The trip is the first by a U.S. House Speaker in 25 years, and Pelosi and the delegation say the visit honors America's unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy. Torrential rain on Wednesday morning prompts alerts for many parts of the country. The Interior Ministry says people should pay special attention to flooding. A heat wave is expected to follow the rain in many regions. South Korea's total COVID-19 cases since the start of the pandemic have now topped 20 million. As of 9 p.m. Tuesday, the country confirmed more than 110,000 daily cases, continuing the upward trend.
Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has arrived in Taiwan in a visit that risks pushing relations between Washington and Beijing to a new low. This is the first time in 25 years that a U.S. House Speaker visited the island.
Shortly after arrival, China said that it will launch targeted military operations. In addition, according to Chinese state-run media, Chinese fighter jets crossed the Taiwan Strait. Kim Yo-sun starts us off.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi arrived in Taiwan late on Tuesday in defiance of stern warnings from Beijing. This makes Pelosi the highest-ranking U.S. official in a quarter of a century to visit the self-ruled island claimed by China. Shortly after landing in Taipei, she took to Twitter to say that the visit honors Washington's unwavering support for the island's vibrant democracy. Pelosi is set to meet with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and lawmakers on Wednesday. On the heels of the visit, Beijing vowed to launch targeted military operations in response. Separately, the People's Liberation Army of China said it will conduct military drills near Taiwan.
The Eastern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army will carry out a series of joint military operations around the island of Taiwan, conducting joint air and sea exercises in the northern, southwestern and southeastern sea and airspace of the island, firing live long-range fire in the Taiwan Strait, and organizing conventional missile fire tests in the waters east of the island.
China's state-run media also said late Tuesday night that Chinese fighter jets had crossed the Taiwan Strait. Despite such threats from Beijing, the Taiwanese government reassured its people that there is no need to worry. Pelosi is currently on a trip to Asia with stops in Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan included in her schedule. While her visit to Taiwan was unannounced, it had been widely anticipated. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea has seen its total number of COVID-19 infections surpass the 20 million mark, meaning 2 out of 5 people have been infected. The country reported 115,311 new cases as of 9 p.m. Tuesday. Data released Tuesday by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency warned of the more serious effect the virus has on the elderly. It said around 83% of critically ill patients are aged 60 or above. In terms of fatalities, that amount rises to about 93%. The government recently strengthened virus prevention measures at facilities deemed vulnerable to infections, including nursing homes. Inflation in South Korea rose to a level not seen in almost 24 years. Food and fuel prices are the key drivers of that, and concerns mount as the trend shows no signs of slowing down in the coming months. Jung helps us look beyond the digits.
South Korea's inflation hit a fresh high, recording its fastest pace of increase in nearly 24 years. Statistics Korea reported on Tuesday that the Consumer Price Index in July stands at 108.74. This is up 6.3% compared to the same period a year earlier, the fastest rise since November 1998. The country's consumer prices have seen on-year rises of more than 6% for 2 months in a row now, far higher than the government's target of 2%. Statistics Korea says the price rise is mostly due to soaring prices of industrial products, including petroleum goods.
The rise of 6.3% in July's consumer prices has been driven by the continued sharp rise in industrial goods, including petroleum goods, and the price of services, including dining out. Electricity, gas and water bills and prices of farm goods have also risen further.
Consumers have seen higher prices at the pumps in July. On average, prices of petroleum products surged by more than 35% on year. But the rise was slower than the previous month. Also, much of the July increase was driven by a jump in major items on people's grocery shopping lists, including prices of imported beef soaring close to 25% on year. The prices of vegetables also rose nearly 26% compared to a year earlier. Statistics Korea attributed this to the unfavorable weather and the increase in production costs.
With soaring prices, some consumers are looking for more affordable options. Some fruits and vegetables previously weren't sold because they're relatively ugly or have scratches, but now they're up for sale as a cheaper alternative.
I used to get several kinds of products, but these days I just get one. Even though there are scratches on the fruit, the scratches are just on the peels, so if they are safe to eat and taste the same, it doesn't matter, and I get cheaper ones.
One expert predicts the country's inflation will peak in the second half of this year, but he says it'll depend on the economic and geopolitical situation abroad.
Consumer prices are expected to peak in the third or fourth quarter of this year, but it will take a while to bring it down to the target level. South Korea's consumer prices go in line with those of the U.S.
As the government's priority is to stabilize prices, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong said gradual 0.25 percentage point hikes in key interest rates would be adequate. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The National Assembly passed a bill that could help bring down fuel prices. This opens the possibility of cutting fuel taxes by as much as 50% when deemed necessary. Choi Min-jung explains further.
The South Korean government will now be able to do more to bring down fuel prices.
The price of oil has risen sharply since last year due to global economic uncertainties caused by the war in Ukraine. We are aiming to lessen the economic burden on ordinary people.
The National Assembly on Tuesday passed a bill enabling the government to cut fuel taxes by as much as 50% if necessary until 2024. That's up from the current limit of 30%. Practically speaking, because the way the system works, the tax cut could be increased from the current 37% to as much as 55%. Based on current prices, this would bring down the cost of a liter of gasoline by an additional 148 won, or about 11 US cents. This does not mean, however, that there will be an additional tax cut immediately. The National Assembly said the decision to implement another tax cut will be made by the government after taking into account inflation as well as international oil prices. South Korea's finance minister Chu Kyung-ho said oil prices have recently been falling, so he hopes the extra tax cuts won't be needed. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The total number of employment vacancies in the U.S. fell in June to a 9-month low, as the country's labor market shows signs of slowing. According to data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, job openings dropped to 10.7 million in June. This was a 5.4% on-month drop and the biggest since April 2020. The number of new hires also slowed during the month, dropping 2% to around 6.4 million. This comes as several tech giants, including Apple and Amazon, recently announced that they would slow hiring. Facing a widening internal crisis, the People Power Party plans to convene its national committee to approve a new emergency leadership system. A complete overhaul was deemed necessary after most of the ruling bloc's leaders resigned. Lee Kyung-eun brings the updates.
Following the suspension of its party chairman and a series of setbacks, the ruling People Power Party is speeding up its push to launch an emergency leadership system. Declaring the current situation an emergency during a general meeting on Monday was the first step. The next step followed immediately. It held a spring council meeting on Tuesday morning and approved holding a national committee meeting, which has the ultimate right to appoint the interim leader. 4 out of 7 members approved. 2 members considered critical of the plan were absent. With the latest decision, a national committee meeting is likely to be held on Friday, followed by the launching of the leadership by next week at the latest.
The Standing National Committee will review whether the party qualifies to switch to emergency leadership or not. Then the National Committee will ultimately vote to approve the launch of such a system and appoint an interim leader.
The immediate hurdles are now cleared. The head of the National Committees, Ho Byung-soo, shifted his stance and said he will work towards swiftly convening a meeting. The party is also planning to revise its rules to allow an acting chair appoint emergency leadership when the chairman's seat is not only vacant but also suspended. However, there are other things to consider regarding the role and duration. The interim leadership could run only until Chairman Lee Jun-seok returns in January. Or they could serve a shorter term and pave the way for an early national convention to elect new leadership, which is what usually happens in South Korean politics. This case, however, will effectively block Chairman Lee from returning to his post. Floor Leader Kwon Song-dong says he's still gathering opinions on the matter, as well as regarding the candidates for the interim leader. Young-eun, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. On Tuesday, the Ministry of Interior and Safety launched a new police bureau to oversee police policy as well as promotions and appointments of senior level officers. The nation's police officers strongly condemned the move, as the National Police Agency has been largely independent under previous administrations.
However, the government claimed that the police's growing investigative authority required an official arm of the government to act as a watchdog. So why do we have such transition right now in the country's law enforcement policy? For the answers, we have Professor Song Se-ryun of Kyunghee University Law School to discuss further. Good morning.
Good morning.
First, let's focus on the government's claim. Lawmakers recently passed a series of amendments that would yield the most of the prosecution's investigative authority to the police. What are these specific changes?
Well, the prosecutor reform was a campaign agenda and a key measure throughout the ex-president, President Moon's tenure. Before, prosecutors had literally all the powers to open, close, direct investigation, and indict the case for prosecution. As far as the criminal justice goes, there was a top-down system. Now, what has changed is that the series of legislation divided the roles between the police and the prosecution. So at first, in 2020, the legislature passed the reform bill that left only 6 crimes for the prosecutor's office to investigate, which was corruption, crimes involving economic activities, public officials, election fraud, crimes involving defense industry, and serious accidents. But then, at the end of President Moon's term, the legislature, mostly DPK, Democratic Party of Korea, passed a legislation that strips almost all powers of investigation from the prosecutor's office. So at this point, because of the political drama, which is that the President Yoon became the president, and of course he was the prosecutor general under the President Moon, and who generally opposed the many aspects of the reform. So the battle line is a little bit drawn between the police and the prosecutor's office. At least the optics of it just looks like that. So despite the general consensus that there is a need to apportion the responsibilities and accountabilities between the police and the prosecution, at this point the key issue seems to be that there is a turf fight between the police and the prosecutor's office for upper hand in a criminal justice system. Now, I think the key issue has to be how to design this change, design this new balance of powers and check and balance system. But I think there is a general failure in the political sector to do that.
And well, the legislative branch, during the passing of this series of laws, it was chaotic to say the least. And well, how was this consensus eventually reached?
Right. The problem is that there was ultimately no consensus between the parties and also within the parties to add. And I think that the the key issue that I was talking about, the political process to give the general public the confidence and also kind of accountability and legitimacy to the justice system is very important. But it seems like the reform measure was hastily passed at the end of President Moon's term, but this police bureau institution seems to be a little bit hurried and without too much discussion in the relevant parties. So in that sense, it is doubly risky because the system has to be well designed, but it seems like the details has not been tended to.
Right. So from both sides, we're seeing speedy process without much discussion. Now, what the government is saying seems to be plausible in the front, that the police gain more power, so maybe some control is needed. But the police officers are saying that it will compromise the political neutrality of the police. Now, could you, to many viewers abroad, may not know the sensitivity behind this. So could you give a little bit of a background why police's political neutrality is very important in South Korea?
Well, political neutrality is important historically to begin with. Korea had gone through a handful of dictatorial regimes, and it was an important issue not to let the police power fall into a political strongman's hand. So in that sense, neutrality meant the democratization of Korea, and key feature of that. But with the democratization of Korea almost complete, I think the particular concern is not a pressing issue, but the issue still remains that there has to be a safety guard so that there wouldn't be any reverting back to the unfortunate past. But I think more of important issue at this point is that for the police force, there is a increased role and power, especially more accountability or the role to investigate. So there has to be, accordingly, a more oversight and also check and balance system. So it has to go together. Now, they have to keep their neutrality in terms of the political influence, but at the same time, increased role requires increased oversight, and that oversight has to be transparent. And again, also important is not to involve any political influence.
The Yoon administration, they scrapped the Office of Civil Affairs, which is the department that previously dealt with police affairs. So wouldn't this new police bureau just be the same thing, just rebranding?
Well, in one sense, yes. Back then, the secretary was supposed to just have a liaison role, which would not pose much concern. But frequently, we saw that secretary became the messenger to express president's wishes. So the transparency sometimes was lacking, and there were suspicions that the president was influencing the police governance and how to conduct certain investigations. So that concern remained. Now, if the reform measure is desirable to the extent that there is a role division between the police and the prosecutor's office, that effective system has to be well designed. So it's not just a concern about whether the secretary's role is there or is somewhere else in different form. I think there has to be more visible and also transparent system of check and balances and oversight system. But again, I'm going back to the legislative failure and dysfunctionality of the political system as a whole, that detail has not been tended to. I think that DPK hastily passed some legislations, and the President Yoon and the executive offices measure these days also lacked some due process requirements. So in that sense, I think everybody has to sit down that this designing of a new governance criminal justice system is very important and requires a lot of efforts and a lot of details to be tended to. And that has to be the focal point rather than being seen as a turf fight.
Right. I mean, we can talk for hours with you, Professor, on this, but thank you so much for your insights. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that wraps up the first half of New Day at Arirang. But stick around because coming up in the second half, we cover
the energy crisis in Europe as the continent faces a massive cut of Russian energy supplies. The continent is going to cut down on gas consumption, but is this a feasible option? We ask experts, so stay tuned.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Deal. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to New Day at Arirang. South Korea has been waking up to torrential rain across the country this morning, with heavy rain alerts issued in several regions.
The Korea Meteorological Administration on Wednesday issued a heavy rain warning across parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, including the cities of Incheon and Wonju. The Ministry of Interior and Safety ordered special attention to flooding and urged people to be aware of their safety when using riverside trails or underground roads. With the rain to stop later today, temperatures will rise and the heat wave warning already in place on Jeju Island and Daegu is expected to be expanded to more regions. South Korea's defense chief is traveling to Australia. Lee Jong-sup and his Australian counterpart will discuss cooperation in the arms industry as a follow-up to their meeting at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June. During the 5-day trip, the duo also planned to visit Geelong. That's where the production plant of Hana Defense is under construction to manufacture its self-propelled howitzers. The Australian government signed a deal worth more than $700 million to acquire them. The Korean firm also aims to export its armored vehicle Redback to the country. Myanmar's military government extended the state of emergency that upholds its power for 6 more months. Its leader promised to follow through on some of the points agreed with the leaders of ASEAN more than a year ago, none of which have been fulfilled so far. Shin Ye-eun reports.
The state of emergency in Myanmar has been extended by 6 months. A state-run newspaper on Monday quoted the country's military chief, Senior General Min Aung-hlaing, saying this was to strengthen what he called the genuine and disciplined multi-party democratic system, which he says was the desire of the people. The ruling State Administration Council had first declared a state of emergency when Senior General Min Aung-hlaing seized power via a coup in February 2021. They toppled the democratically elected Aung San Suu Kyi government and has since killed more than 2,000 civilians, according to a Thailand-based human rights organization. Witnessing the violence in the country, the international community, mainly ASEAN countries, have called on Myanmar to immediately put an end to the violence. Last April, 9 ASEAN leaders met with Min Aung Hlaing and composed a 5-point consensus. They ranged from ending violence in the country to maintaining dialogue via special envoy visits to Myanmar. However, a year has passed and Min Aung Hlaing has been accused of defying each point. That's why in a televised speech broadcast on Monday, the junta chief said he would meet some of the points in the consensus within this year. He explained that the military was only unable to implement the 5-point consensus because there wasn't enough stability as a result of internal riots and because of the ongoing pandemic. Exact details on which parts of the consensus he will address first have not yet been revealed. 신예은, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Europe faces an energy crisis as Russia announced further cuts to its energy supplies to the continent. Last week, Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom said it would halve the amount of gas running through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany to just 20% of its capacity. This has prompted concern over whether Europe will have enough gas to manage throughout the winter, as Russia last year supplied 40% of Europe's gas supplies. Over the next 7 months, EU countries will aim to reduce gas usage by 15%, but this is on a voluntary basis with exemptions set for certain countries. And there's also doubt over whether the EU can find alternative supplies. Since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, governments not only in Europe but also around the world have been rethinking their energy security policies, and we discuss how the discussion is moving forward today with Paul J. Saunders, President of Energy Innovation Reform Project, and Park Jin-ho, Vice President for Research and Dean of Kentech Institutes. Thank you both so much for joining us today. My first question to you, Mr. Saunders. Now, EU member states in reaction, they agreed to cut gas consumption by 15% over the next 7 months by March next year. And this, of course, is an attempt to show a unified front against Russia as well. But how feasible is this plan? I mean, and also, where will most of the cuts have to be made?
Well, it's likely certainly to be challenging. I expect the cuts will have to come primarily from the energy sector and from the industrial sector, especially the petrochemical sector. I think that European governments will be quite cautious in doing anything that could undermine public support for their policies. So I think they will try to shield households to the extent that they can. But it will be difficult, and it's an environment in which everyone will have to pitch in.
And Mr. Park, well, the heat that Europe has been facing, this unprecedented heat wave, how has it really affected the energy crisis on the continent and also around the world?
Yes, the heat wave affected the energy supply and demand very severely, not just in Europe, but globally in many countries. In the middle of this energy and food volatility caused by war in Ukraine. The heat wave also affected the farming in many regions due to severe drought, and in addition caused severe problems in supplying cooling water for power plants, including nuclear power plants, especially in France. The worst is yet to come. Geoscientists say that this summer will be the coolest one ever. The next summer will be another coolest summer ever in the future. The geopolitical landscape has suddenly changed in the last 2 to 3 years, and it is affecting the global energy market and industry quite extensively. Energy security now has become the utmost importance in government policies worldwide, with roller-coasting prices of petroleum, coal, and gas. In Europe, for example, natural gas occupies 25 to 30% of the total energy required in the region, and the EU relies heavily on Russian natural gas by 40%. They are currently having difficulties for the summer, but they have to prepare for the worst situation in the coming winter. The reorganization of the global value chain due to the US-China trade conflict is also affecting the global energy market quite significantly. Free trades between countries now are shifting to more strategic partnership between a group of countries. In short, I can say that the global energy market is very volatile now, and the uncertainty level is even going up, which makes energy policy much more complicated. Yeah.
And Mr. Saunders, you said that it's going to be a bit tough to do this, to actually make this 15% cut on a voluntary basis. And we've already seen some resistance in Spain. So what is it going to take to actually make this work?
Well, I think it'll take a combination of two or three things. Certainly, first of all, I think that governments in Europe will do everything they can to try to rally public support for these cuts on, I guess I would call it on a patriotic basis. You know, it's necessary for you as citizens to stand up and do your part at this very challenging time. I'm sure that'll be a big element of it. At the same time, you know, we may see governments trying to implement some mandatory reductions. I expect those would probably be implemented initially on a selective basis rather than comprehensively, and again, likely with the desire, you know, to shield voters as much as possible from impacts.
And Mr. Park, well, what does it mean to have an energy security strategy, something that many governments are thinking about rethinking now? What are the vital roles that the government must play in this scenario?
Well, it's a good question. The energy security strategy requires all the tactics and actions needed for the country and its citizens to run their everyday lives comfortably by securing the energy supply reliability to offset the demands, as well as to run their economies in a sustainable manner. The government plays, in that sense, the most important role in the energy security and reliability by providing policy measures to do so, from the management of energy prices, technology developments, to the incentive schemes for the early stage deployments. One example we can learn from the EU is the recent REPowerEU communication prepared by the European Commission in March 22. And the recent 15% reduction is actually the extension of this REPowerEU. The REPowerEU focuses on three major objectives. The first one is the reduction of EU's dependence on Russian fossil sources. And the second one is the stabilization of natural stockpiles. The last one is the emergency response plan for energy price surge. I think this is a good example of the role of a government in handling the energy security strategy. Yeah, thank you.
So thinking in terms of stages and rather long term as well. And Mr. Saunders, Europe placed sanctions on Russian coal in April, and further import bans are to start on August 10th. So what impact is this going to have on Europe? And can the EU really reduce its reliance on Russian natural gas in the short term?
Well, certainly the European Union and individual European countries have already reduced their reliance on Russian gas significantly as this crisis has unfolded. And as a practical matter, they may have no choice, because this is a question that's not up to the European governments alone. We've seen Russia periodically selectively reducing its gas supplies to individual countries in Europe, and to the extent that President Putin and others in his government view Europe as inevitably reducing or maybe even eliminating energy imports from Russia, then the Russian government has every incentive to try to cut off those supplies or reduce supplies in the way that Moscow believes will have the greatest possible impact politically in Europe. So I think we're seeing really both sides trying to, on the Russian side, certainly to use energy for leverage. On the European side, of course, trying to eliminate that leverage and trying to use Russia's financial reliance on Europe as leverage. And we're just going to see over the course of the coming months who has greater stamina.
Mr. Saunders, well, the question is, with winter just a few months away, how will Europe get through the colder seasons?
Well, that's a big question. There are a variety of factors. Of course, we have to see, how hot is the summer, how much gas does Europe need over the summer, how much gas can they consume versus putting into storage. Then in the winter, obviously, how cold is the winter? So certainly European leaders hope that through a combination of conservation and new supplies and other approaches that they'll be able to manage. I think as a practical matter, neither we nor Europeans will really know until the winter whether this will work and how it will work. There are too many unknowns, starting with the weather and Russia's conflict.
Well, in the face of all these unknowns, Mr. Park, the energy crisis in Europe has triggered concerns all over the world, really. And does South Korea face the danger of such crisis? Do we have sufficient storage or alternative options available to us?
Yes, we can face the danger of energy crisis if we do not prepare properly and proactively. I think that the impact that Korean citizens will feel directly from the natural gas supply is rather limited, since South Korea imports natural gas in liquefied natural gas, LNG form, and the major imports are coming from Qatar, Australia, USA, and Indonesia, and relies minimally on the Russian gas. The one important characteristic about the natural gas from Russia is that it is PNG, the pipeline natural gas. And it should be noted that the EU imports most of the fossil energies from Russia, even though others come from Norway, Algeria, USA, and Qatar. And South Korea can have impact in rather indirect manner, caused by the global shortage in energy supply and the corresponding price increase in LNG in particular. As you may know, the South Korea imports more than 90% of its primary energy from overseas, and we are currently observing a trade deficit for the last 3 months in a row, even though our export has increased during that period. Increased import in the primary energy exceeded the exports of our goods. Increased energy costs can increase the logistics costs and again cause inflation. So, as you know, the Korean economy largely depends on the export, and the export is the main driver of the Korean economy. So if this volatile situation in the global energy market continues, South Korea will have to also suffer from this global volatility. Yes.
So, as you said, Mr. Park, it's vital to plan ahead for the possible eventualities. And what are the short and long-term strategies needed at this point to address the energy shortage?
Well, as I emphasized previously, the short-term energy strategy should focus on the energy security and reliability. And to do that, we have to utilize all the available tools we have. This includes constructing the optimal energy mix portfolio in our nation, utilizing nuclear, gas, and renewables, etc., and reducing the energy consumption as much as possible. And in other sense, that to try to electrify the non-electric energies which uses fossil fuels, such as heat and fuel. And the strategy to mitigate the global volatility in energy markets should be based on securing and diversifying energy imports, managing the energy prices using tax schemes, as well as related policy measures. And supports for the individual, vulnerable individuals and corporations should also be precisely targeted and properly managed. But in the long run, we have to prepare for the future. As we all know, that by October 2021, over 140 countries have declared carbon neutral by 2050 to address the global challenge of climate crisis. And 14 countries, including South Korea, even legislated the carbon neutral goals. And the energy transition towards low carbon society is currently in progress, and the expansion of clean energy such as renewables and hydrogens are underway. It has to be strongly, developed and supported by most.
So it looks like we need a variety of alternative options available in order to really procure energy security going forward. And well, I'm afraid we're out of time today. That was Paul J. Saunders, President of Energy Innovation Reform Project, and Park Jin-ho, Vice President for Research and Dean of Kentech Institutes. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There are no plans to change mandatory military service rules to provide exemption to BTS. That's coming from the nation's defense chief, who also mentioned alternative service is off the table as well. But there could be a way for the K-pop group to perform while serving. Kim Ji-yeon shares us with his remarks.
During a Parliamentary Defense Committee meeting on Monday, South Korea's Defense Minister Lee Jong-sub said the issue of BTS's military service can be handled without breaching the principle of fairness and equity. Minister Lee said he believes there is a way to give BTS an opportunity to continue to perform for the benefit of national interests, adding if they join the military, he believes there will be a way to allow them to practice and join overseas performances. All able-bodied Korean men are required to serve 18 to 24 months of mandatory military service. But some receive exemptions for noteworthy contributions to the nation. Currently, exemptions to compulsory military service in music are granted to those who have won the first prize in an international competition, such as pianist Cho Sung-jin, winner of the 2015 International Chopin Piano Competition. Despite support from fans, accomplishments by K-pop stars don't qualify. During the meeting, ruling People Power Party representative Song Il-jung stressed the need to create a system to serve national interests so more K-pop stars like BTS can continue without the long breaks from their career due to compulsory military service. He said BTS generates an estimated $43 billion of economic benefits over the space of a decade. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
J-Hope performed at the Lollapalooza music festival to rave reviews from local media. An article in the Chicago Sun-Times said the BTS member commanded the stage with his trademark vocals and choreography as a solo act. Rolling Stone also gave praise, saying that J-Hope became the first South Korean artist to headline a major American music festival. Consequence of Sound emphasized J-Hope kicked off a new era for BTS. Lollapalooza took place in Grant Park from Thursday to Sunday. Other headliners included Dua Lipa and Green Day. For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you as well.
Good morning, Matt. Let's start with Iran, as a fresh set of US sanctions has triggered a response from Tehran.
Well, that's right. Iran's foreign minister actually said on Tuesday that hundreds of next-generation uranium enrichment centrifuges have been activated. Now, this follows new sanctions by the US on Monday to pressure Iran into curbing its nuclear program. The sanctions are aimed at reducing Iran's oil and petrochemical revenue by targeting Chinese and other firms, which the US believes help sell tens of millions of dollars of Iranian oil to East Asia. Meanwhile, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, told reporters on Tuesday that Iran's nuclear program is, quote, moving ahead very, very fast and is growing in ambition and in capacity. The head of the nuclear watchdog insisted that the agency needs full access to verify all of its aspects, admitting that Tehran's nuclear program at present differs substantially from its 2015 program. Now, warring sides in Yemen's ongoing conflict have extended their truce for another 2 months. The agreement made Tuesday between Yemen's internationally recognized government and the country's Houthi rebels will see the truce continue until October 2nd. The extension also includes a commitment from both sides to work on an expanded truce agreement. The years-long conflict has created a major humanitarian food crisis and seen tens of thousands of people killed. According to the UN, the truce, which started in April, is now the longest conflict-free period in over 7 years since Yemen's civil war erupted in 2014. Amid rising tensions with China, Taiwan is preparing its air raid shelters. Underground shopping centers, basement car parks, and the subway system have been designated as shelters in the event of an attack by Chinese missiles. Taipei has over 4,600 such shelters, capable of holding roughly 12 million people, more than 4 times its current population. Taiwan has also restarted comprehensive air raid exercises last month for the first time since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a senior official for the shelters, the Ukraine war has also led to a renewed sense of urgency. China considers Taiwan its territory and has stepped up military activity around the island. Taiwan, meanwhile, has vowed to defend itself. And finally, more sea turtles in Florida are being born female. Scientists say this is due to warmer beaches, which affect the developing turtle eggs. Cooler sands see more eggs become male turtles, while warmer sand produces more females. A sand temperature of 29 degrees Celsius normally results in a 50-50 split across gender, but hotter Florida summers have seen beach sand get so hot that some scientists in the Florida Keys haven't found any newly hatched male turtles in the past 4 years. Australia and Cape Verde have also reported increasing feminization across local turtle populations.
Good morning. You know, nature can be really amazing. While Typhoon Trasa has dissipated, the after effects of the typhoon are still in play, with on and off heavy rain dropping across much of Korea. Well, a heavy rain warning in Seoul was lifted just a couple of hours ago, but parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do are still under a heavy rain advisory. And the capital region could see up to 120 millimeters more rain, mostly during the first half of the day. Jeju and the south coast could see 10 to 60 or 70 millimeters. Now, aside from the heavy rain alerts in parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do, most regions are under heat wave alerts, with a heat wave warning in effect in Daegu and parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces and on Jeju Island. Well, it felt like we had a break from successive tropical nights last night in the capital, but the thermometer actually pointed above 25 degrees all night in Seoul and elsewhere. Seoul will be going up to 31 degrees this afternoon, Daegu topping out at 34 degrees, but it could get hotter as the rain lets up in Seoul by mid-afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up our newscast for this hour. We'll be back tomorrow for our Thursday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks ever so much for joining us this morning, and do tune into Arirang News for updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.